universe was quiet but not in peace. In the far reaches of the metaphysical realms, beyond even the folds of time and space, where abstract concepts exist as tangible truths, a slow corruption had begun. Realms where dreams were born, where gods whispered their first words, where destiny was forged and unmade, these began to tremble under the influence of something ancient, something uncontainable. Entire dimensions fell silent, their timelines devoured, their meanings unraveled. The architects of reality, those silent cosmic watchmen who stitched multiverses together with strands of purpose, recoiled in horror. Something was moving, not just through space or time, but through the bedrock of meaning itself. And at its center was Darkseid, not the manifestation that fought Superman, not the avatar that fell before justice. This was the true form, the living idea of tyranny, the platonic shadow that no physical plane could bear. His presence distorted everything. He was not just an entity, he was inevitability. Where he walked, concepts buckled. Free will died, hope fractured into silence. The anti-life equation did not merely exist in him, it was him. And now, true form Darkseid had risen, not to conquer a planet or a dimension, but to claim finality itself. All things must end, that was the nature of entropy. But Darkseid did not represent decay. He represented the final assertion of meaninglessness. The universal submission of all thought, all belief, all existence to one will. His, not death, but stagnation. Not silence, but obedience. In him, the freedom of existence was a lie. And now in this era beyond even the source wall, where the boundaries of creation had begun to bleed, Darkseid sought dominion over the divine tapestry that existed outside known realms. The whisper reached Yggdrasil, the world tree, older than the gods of Asgard, older than the 9 realms themselves, trembled with what had been unleashed. In its deepest roots where the runes were carved by ancient seers, a ripple moved, a cry, a vision of annihilation beyond understanding. Thor, now more than just the Odinson, sat at the pinnacle of this tree. Not in Asgard, not in Midgard, but in the dimension that connects them all, the realm of eternal thought. He had transcended mortality, ascended through sacrifice and wisdom. With Odin's death and the unlocking of the sacred runes, Thor had become more than a god. Rune King Thor no longer followed fate, he had slain it. The Norns no longer spun his thread, he had cut their loom and burned the weave. He could see the past, the future, and the roads not taken. He had unmade the gods who fed on belief. He had reached the apex of cosmic awareness within the Norse structure. Yet as he sat upon the throne made of root and storm, his visions burned with one truth. Something was wrong, not just in Midgard or among the stars, but in the very function of existence. In dream,
he saw an endless gray, not death, but control, not silence, but a scream drowned in universal conformity. The whispers of Mimir, the echoes of Yggdrasil, the warnings of the Disir, all aligned. Something was moving outside the world tree's branches. Something ancient, alien, absolute. Thor rose, and the storm responded. Rune circled his body, weaving ancient spells of sight and judgment. The hammer, once lost, now returned not in form, but in essence. Mjolnir had become part of him, just as the Odin Force had. Yet this was not a power trip Thor had long forsaken. Ego, he knew, this battle would be different. Not one of strength, but of truths. Not of muscle, but of meaning. And then the sky cracked. But it was not the sky of Earth or Asgard. It was the conceptual canopy, the spiritual border that shields imagination from control. Through it stepped a form. Not large, not monstrous, but inevitable. A silhouette formed of silence and shadow. Wrapped in geometry, the mind refused to process. There were no glowing eyes. There was only darkness. A being who had stood before the source, who had defied it, who had learned the truth behind it and laughed. He did not move. The realm moved around him, folding to accommodate a presence that did not enter but arrived. Darkseid had come. The real one. Thor spoke first, because words still had power. You tread on the pots of purpose, shadow being. You corrupt the weave of destiny not by fire or blade, but by unmaking what cannot be restored. Darkseid did not answer with thunder. He answered with philosophy. There is no destiny, only will, only power, only the silence of obedience. The belief in fate is your weakness, God of stories. I am not here to destroy you. I am here to redefine. Thor's eyes narrowed. The runes around him began to twist, translating ancient magic into raw metaphysical energy. You will find that I do not submit. I have killed the very gods who demanded worship. I have freed the trapped thoughts of reality from their parasites. Darkseid stepped forward, and the ground beneath him ceased to exist, not cracked or shattered, but nullified. Freedom is the illusion, while without direction is chaos. I bring unity, order, peace, a single voice, without contradiction, a final shape. Peace without choice is slavery. Thor growled. Order without dissent is death. You claim to be the final voice, but you are the end of dialogue. I am the storm. I am the resistance that exists simply because it must. And I, said Darkseid, with a voice that shook nothing because nothing dared oppose it. I am the reason resistance is futile. They stared at one another, not as beings of flesh or bone, but as concepts in conflict. Thor, the embodiment of earned divinity, of self-forged transcendence, born of struggle and rebirth. Darkseid, the idea of finality, not a being who sought death, but one who made death irrelevant. In him, all things ceased not because they were destroyed, but because they were consumed into singular purpose. This was not a battle of punches or beams. This would be war between narratives, the chaos of choice versus the unity of submission. Thor represented the triumph of identity, the unpredictable evolution of self. Darkseid was the negation of such change, the reduction of all will into a single vector, obedience. Yggdrasil screamed as the paradox breached its branches. The axis mundi, the center of the mythic cosmos, began to unravel, not from violence, but from ideological incompatibility. Something had to give. Thor raised his arms, summoning the essence of thunder, the knowledge of the runes, the power of the All-Father, the death of fate. And Darkseid opened his palm, revealing not a weapon, but the end, the black equation of obedience, glowing softly like a candle in an endless void. One storm, one silence. The collision would not simply shape the outcome of a battle. It would determine whether existence would continue to be a symphony of divergent voices, or a perfect, eternal, inescapable monotone. And thus, the first blow was about to fall. The realms beyond reality held their breath as to absolute forces, prepared to clash not as men, not as gods, but as living philosophies. Rune King Thor, crowned by sacrifice and tempered by the knowledge of the runes, stood as the flame of free will, the storm of defiance against inevitable collapse. True form Darkseid, born of conceptual tyranny and sculpted in the shape of control, loomed like the death of thought itself, a being whose very essence was antithetical to freedom. This was not a fight merely to protect a world, a realm, or a timeline. This was the confrontation between divergent truths, between the creative chaos of identity and the sterile permanence of absolute order. Darkseid moved not with speed, but with inevitability. Every step he took bent the axis of Yggdrasil's reality. The sacred branches, once firm and infinite, trembled under the pressure of an intruding law that refused to coexist. Where he passed, runes dimmed. Where his gaze turned, prophecies unwrote themselves. Thor summoned the full force of the Odin Force and Rune Magic, drawing strength from the primal roots of creation, where the first sparks of life rebelled against the void. This power surged through him like a living river of fire and memory, and still he knew it might not be enough. They collided. Thor struck first, hurling forth a torrent of metaphysical lightning imbued with the runes of binding, unraveling, and renewal. The blast tore through dimensions, igniting reality in its path. a weapon forged to destroy that which lies beyond life and time. But Darkseid, the embodiment of absolute enforcement, stood unmoved. The Omega effect countered not just energy, but the very meaning behind the attack. He raised his hand, and the beam did not shatter. It ceased, erased from history, its intention dissected and rendered obsolete. Thor leapt forward, fist raised, conjuring Mjolnir in symbolic essence, a construct of all the storms he had ever endured. He brought it down with a cry that tore through the 9 realms. Darkseid caught it mid-swing. There was no sound, no clash. It simply stopped, as if its existence had been vetoed. "You do not understand," Darkseid spoke, his voice echoing, not in ears, but in will. "You fight with the belief that choice matters. That power comes from growth. I am not your opposite. I am your inevitable." Thor broke free and summoned the storm within. Runes lit across his skin, glowing like stars, collapsing into fury. He spoke the words of unmaking, the forbidden chants of the Disir. And the tree responded. Yggdrasil poured its energy into him, empowering him with the raw conceptual nature of divine resistance. This time, when he struck, he wounded Darkseid not physically, but existentially. The blow disrupted the anti-life equation, fractured the illusion of stillness. For a moment, Thor's scream of defiance rippled through the void, birthing 1,000 timelines where resistance endured. But it was not enough. Darkseid's form fractured, and then reassembled instantly, stronger. Not healed, not reformed, but reinforced. The blow had been analyzed, cataloged, stripped of unpredictability. The Omega effect adapted, reshaping itself to be immune to such efforts again. Even defiance becomes predictable. God of Thunder, in resisting, you reveal yourself. In striking, you teach me how to render your legacy meaningless. Thor understood now. This was not a battle of power. It was a war of sustainability. Darkseid did not conquer through violence. He converted. He corrupted, and Thor, for all his strength, was still bound to story, to meaning, to identity. He fought for choice, but the more he fought, the more he fell into the structure of a fight he could not control. His resistance fed the anti-life equation, proving the necessity of suppression. Thor pulled on his final well of strength, the Rune of Sacrifice, a last resort that unbound his essence, letting him become one with the fabric of reality. He dissolved into a storm of raw willpower, an omnidirectional tempest of magic, lightning, memory, and belief. For an instant, he was the multiverse's will to continue. The tree screamed, the cosmos flared, even the source felt the echo of his becoming. And yet, Darkseid stood, not untouched, but unyielding. He reached out, not in violence, but in imposition. His palms stretched toward the storm, and the Omega effect did what even Thor feared. It rewrote the storm's purpose, not destroyed, not defeated, redefined. The storm became still. The runes dulled. The lightning ceased to question. The will of Thor was bent not because he lacked strength, but because strength itself had become irrelevant in the presence of a will that would not negotiate. Even gods are shaped by belief, Darkseid said, closing his hand. I remove belief. I replace it with certainty. You are a great flame, Thor. But the fire always dies. The storm collapsed. Thor fell not broken, but silenced. Not by injury, but by conceptual exhaustion. He had fought not just a being, but an outcome. And in that war, inevitability always has time on its side. Darkseid turned. The branches of Yggdrasil, dimmed and fractured, began to reweave under his guidance, not as a tree of choice, but a system of order. He did not destroy. He reassigned. The old gods were gone, and in their place was the final word. True Form Darkseid had not merely won a fight, he had claimed a definition.